Hi everyone, Macsen here. Welcome to my multi-talent class video for Pillars of Eternity, the White March expansion part 1. During the course of this video, I'm going to be showing off and going into detail about 11 new talents that were added in this new expansion. Basically, they are multi-class or hybrid talents. They are weaker versions of talents or abilities already available to certain classes. So say for example this one here, Acolytes Radiance. This is an ability that's normally available to priests. This one, Apprentices Sneak-Attack, that's normally available to rogues, and that's druid, that's cipher, paladin, etc. So as I mentioned, they're weaker abilities or talents available to certain classes, so they're not as strong, but they allow you to diversify your party a bit, especially if, say for example, you didn't have a priest within your party. You could take this to get this ability, so it may be useful in certain circumstances. Now, because these are weakened abilities or talents of normal class abilities or talents, none of them are particularly overpowered, but they're definitely worthwhile taking in certain circumstances. And during the course of this video, I'm going to be letting you know when I believe you should take them or not, or when you should maybe consider taking them. So before I go through all of this list, I should mention the important fact that you can't actually pick the lesser talent or lesser ability associated with the class that you're leveling up. So say for example in this situation, I can't actually pick the fighter's lesser talent, and if I for example was a rogue, I wouldn't be able to pick this talent. If I was a cipher, I wouldn't be able to pick that talent. If I were a chanter, I wouldn't be able to pick that talent, and so on. Starting off, Acolytes Radiance. This talent is associated with the priest class. I quite like this one. It's definitely useful in certain circumstances. It's a large area of effect spell, so it's affected by your intelligence, of course. And this basically affects vessels, which are the undead type creature within the game. So it does burn damage against them, and this burn damage actually levels up during the course of the game as well. So it's a base of 20. This fighter has a might of 20, so this has been increased quite a bit. And also it frightens them, so it's a small debuff to resolve dexterity and their accuracy. And the damage is done over a number of seconds. Sadly though, this is only per rest, unlike the priest's ability, which is per encounter. So this has questionable value. If you tend to be not great in combat and you're resting more often, it's going to be more valuable for you than someone who basically doesn't rest all that much. And also if you pick certain other talents, its basic ability goes up in value as well. Say for example the build that you had Sign of Flame, you'd be doing more burn damage from it. If for some reason you had picked Sanctifier, you could get more damage out of this as well. So I would definitely consider this if you don't have a priest within your party. I probably wouldn't pick it if I did have a priest. And also if I had someone within a party who was really burn damage focused and had a Sign of Flame, I might consider picking it as well. And also if you didn't have too much healing within your party as well, you might want to pick it in those circumstances also. So Apprentices Sneak-Attack is the talent associated with the rogue. It's a lesser version of their ability. Does 15% damage against any targets afflicted with these debuffs or within the first couple of seconds of combat. The rogue's version is a lot better than that, it's 50%, but this talent is actually really useful still. I would take this with any character build that I'm trying to maximize my damage with, probably late game though. There's a few talents that are better than this for doing damage or hitting your opponent in the first place, but I would definitely consider taking this at some point with a lot of character builds, especially if I had party members that did a lot of these debuffs within the party. So say for example ciphers, wizards, druids. This is definitely a very useful talent in certain circumstances. Aspirant's Mark is the talent associated with the druid. It's a faux era of effect spell. So basically I would only consider taking this if you have high intelligence. That's how you'd get the most use out of it. It basically reduces deflection and reflex of your opponent's attacks at will and has a small accuracy boost. So it's a debuff basically. It makes your certain enemies easier to hit in one way or another. Sadly it's only 2 per rest, but it does have good range and it's a fast speed as well. To be honest, all in all, I wouldn't particularly recommend this talent. There's probably better talents that you can pick in most circumstances than this one. So the next talent is Enigmas Charm. This is probably one of the most powerful and useful of the new multi-class talents available. It's associated with the Cipher. Now what this does is basically allow you to charm a target. It does have some drawbacks though. It's very slow and you can only do it after 5 seconds of combat time. But it's per encounter, which is amazing. It's got an okay range of 7 meters. And the base amount for actually charming a target is actually pretty good. It's got a base amount of 8 seconds, which of course can be modified by your intelligence. So being able to charm targets is, well, charms is probably one of the most powerful debuffs or control abilities within the game. So having extra builds that are able to do this is going to be really useful. So there are quite a few builds that I would actually take this at some point with. It can be very useful, especially if you don't have anyone within your party who's able to charm targets like ciphers or wizards, for example. Gallant's Focus is the talent associated with the Paladin. Now it's basically a lesser version of the Paladin Zealous Focus. It works in an identical way, except it has less accuracy, 4 instead of 6. It has no percentage hit bonus associated with it, and also the range is less as well. It's 2.5 meters instead of 4 meters. What it should mention here though is that this is affected by intelligence. I'm 99% sure of that. So if you are going to take this with a character, make sure you have a high intelligence amount to get the most out of this ability. I would definitely recommend taking this talent in almost all circumstances where you don't have a paladin that has Zealous Focus. The reason why you wouldn't want to take it if you do have a paladin with Zealous Focus is because that ability suppresses this ability, so it wouldn't work unless you basically move outside the paladin's range. So yeah, it wouldn't be too useful in that circumstance, but in other circumstances getting an extra 4 accuracy over a certain range is going to be really useful. So the next talent is Novices Suffering. This talent is associated with the Monk class. What it does is basically add increasing amounts of unarmed damage and unarmed accuracy throughout the course of the game with any character that happens to pick it. You can see here that at this level it doesn't add unarmed accuracy, but yeah, it levels up throughout the game, so at certain levels you start to get extra amounts. Now I've really racked my mind trying to think about certain situations where this talent would be useful, but there just isn't any that I can really come up with. There's not really any classes within the game that benefit from unarmed attacks apart from the monk, and of course the monk can't pick their own weaker talents. So yeah, there's not really any situation where I would probably pick this. I did think that maybe the druid might be able to benefit from it, because they can turn into creatures like bears, wolves, and maybe it would count as unarmed damage, but it doesn't. So yeah, druids aren't a character that I would pick this with either. I don't believe that this would ever level up to a high enough amount where it's better than weapons. So yeah, this pick is really poor in my opinion. Outlander's Frenzy is the talent associated with the Barbarian class. So what it does is increase your might and constitution for a short period of time. The base amount being 12 seconds. This is modified by your intelligence. It also rapidly increases your attack speed at the cost of deflection, and also the ability to see your health and endurance. So this is probably a decent ability for certain builds I can think of, like the melee rogue for example, or perhaps a melee cipher. So you can really do a huge amount of extra damage over a short period of time. Sadly though, it's only got average speed, so it takes a little while to actually get up and running in the first place. And probably the worst thing of all is that it's 1 per rest. So this has really questionable value in my opinion. If it was per encounter, it'd be really good actually for certain builds, but 1 per rest, I'm not so sure. So the next talent is Prestidigitators Missiles, which I had to practice a bit to actually pronounce properly. This is associated with the Wizard class, and basically it works in a very similar, if not identical way to how Minor Letters Minor Missiles works. What it does is create 3 projectiles, and each and every one of those projectiles has a chance of doing a base amount of damage between 9 and 17, but this can be modified of course dependent on your might stat, and also if the character that you pick this with happens to pick Spirit of Decay for example, that's another way you could get a bit of a damage boost to it. Now sadly this doesn't level up over the course of the game. This amount of damage is basically fixed, which is a downside to it. So arguably this is better earlier on in the game before you face really powerful opponents. What I would say about this talent though is it can be very useful in certain circumstances. It's fast, so you can basically cast it almost straight away, and it has a really good range. So say for example you happen to find yourself against a wizard that's causing you a lot of problems and they're quite far away, and maybe they're reasonably close to death but not that close. You could maybe use the Prestidigitators Missiles against them in that circumstance and take them out before they cause you any more troubles. It is 2 per rest though, which is a downside, but yeah, I think this is definitely worthwhile taking in certain circumstances. I quite like this one. Romesh Summon is the talent associated with the Chanter class. So basically what this does is allow you to summon 2 human skeletons, and you can do it once per encounter, which is really good. So every combat you get yourself into, you can do it 1 time. It's a range of 10 meters, which isn't bad at all. The speed is average, which isn't that big of a drawback really, although occasionally you might get interrupted while casting it. The really big drawback about this talent though is the fact that it takes at least 15 seconds in combat before you're allowed to use it. Now quite a few combats could be over before that time has elapsed, so its use is it's questionable value, this one, especially when you consider the fact that human skeletons aren't all that good either. So this might be useful early on within the game, but when you're really reaching the high levels you may want to respec your character to get rid of this talent if you did pick it. I would say that summons in general are most useful when you're actually outnumbered and at the start of combat, so the fact that you wouldn't be able to do it until really well into the combat means this really has questionable use in my opinion. The next talent is associated with the Ranger class, that's Runner's Wounding Shot. This is basically a lesser version of the Ranger's Wounding Shot talent. Basically it allows you to hobble opponents. Hobble is a debuff. It reduces dexterity and movement and reflex, so basically means they attack a bit less, quicker, and you can hit them more easily with area of effect spells, and it's really useful in preventing enemies to get into your front lines basically. Hobbled of course is a debuff that's associated with the sneak attack that rogues have, or from this ability here, or even the Skane Priest's ability. So that's quite useful if you have any of those within your party. Overall though, I'd say that this Wounding Shot isn't all that great though. It can be useful maybe in certain circumstances. The damage inflicted over time means that the damage isn't actually inflicted straight away. It takes a certain amount of time before the totality of the damage is inflicted. In fact, it's only 80% of the damage is inflicted in this circumstance. And what I really don't like about this ability is that it's only 6 meters. So if it was like 12 meters, you could hobble someone and prevent them from getting towards your lines. It would be much more useful, but 6 meters, they're almost at you already. So I'm really not a huge fan of Runner's Wounding Shot, but in certain circumstances, it might be worthwhile taking. So the final multi-class hybrid talent is Veteran's Recovery. This is associated with the Fighter class. Basically, this allows you to recover endurance when your character's been damaged. It works in exactly the same way as a fighter's constant recovery ability. The base amount is 1.5, but that can be increased dependent on how much might you have. So the more might your character has, the better this will work. You can see here that this character with 20 might, his endurance is being increased by 2 instead of 1.5. It happens every 3 seconds. I would say that this is most useful early on when your character has little amounts of endurance, but like most of these hybrid talents, you'll probably want to pick other talents early on just because they're more useful, more powerful. So I would recommend picking this in certain circumstances, especially with frontline builds, or any type of build that basically is liable to receive damage often and frequently. It's a pretty decent talent overall. So I believe that concludes this overview video of the new multi-class hybrid talents added to the game in the White March Part 1. As I mentioned earlier on, they're definitely not overpowered in any way, but they're a welcome addition to the game. They definitely allow you to diversify your party, and also they're very useful if you want to specialize in certain areas. So yeah, they're definitely useful in certain circumstances. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting or helpful, please help me out by giving this video a like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. There's more Pillars of Eternity the White March content coming on the channel soon. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.